Something happened in a garden outside Jerusalem before the sun rose on a Sunday morning. Something that no camera captured. Something that no human eye fully witnessed. Something that happened in the space between absolute darkness and the first gray light of dawn, in a sealed tomb cut into rock, behind a stone that weighed more than several men could move, guarded by soldiers trained to kill without hesitation. Something happened, and whatever it was, it cracked history in half. Not metaphorically, not spiritually in some vague, untouchable way. Actually, concretely, in real time, in real space, in a real garden, in a real city, to a real body that had been real dead for 36 hours. Something happened, and the world has never been the same since. You think you know this story. I know you do. You've heard it every Easter. Empty tomb, risen Jesus, hallelujah, women running, disciples confused, Thomas doubting, appearances, ascension, end of story. But you don't know it. Not really. Not the way it actually happened. Not the way it felt. Not the weight of it. Not the darkness before the dawn. Not what the soldiers saw that made trained Roman warriors fall to the ground like dead men. Not what was happening in that tomb in the hours before anyone arrived. Not what the resurrection actually means. Not as a theological concept. Not as a church doctrine, but as an event. A real, actual world-altering event that happened at a specific moment in time and space and changed the rules of existence itself. That's what we're doing today. We're going back, all the way back, to Jerusalem, to 33 AD, to a Sunday morning that started in darkness and ended in the most impossible thing that has ever happened in human history. Stay with me, because this is not the story you think it is. To understand the morning of the resurrection, you need to understand the weight of the Friday that came before it. Not the theology of it, the human reality of it. 3 days earlier, Jesus of Nazareth had been arrested in a garden at night by a mob carrying torches and weapons. He had been dragged through a series of illegal trials, before the Jewish high priest, before Pilate, before Herod, before Pilate again. He had been beaten. The word the Gospels use implies something beyond what we typically picture. A Roman flogging was an instrument of near death on its own. Men died from it. Soldiers who knew exactly how to maximize suffering and minimize the mercy of a quick death. He had been crowned with thorns, mocked, spat upon, made to carry his own cross through the streets of Jerusalem, while a crowd that had cheered him 5 days earlier now screamed for his death. And then he was crucified. 6 hours on the cross. The method of execution specifically designed to be as prolonged, as public, and as humiliating as possible. Every breath a struggle, every movement agony. The weight of a body slowly crushing itself. And at 3 p.m, after 6 hours, he died. The soldiers confirmed it, a spear through his side. The Gospel of John, written by someone who was standing there and watched it happen, says that water and blood poured out, a medical detail that indicates the rupture of the pericardium, the sac around the heart. He was dead. There was no question, no ambiguity, no room for the theory that he somehow survived and recovered in the tomb. He was dead. They took him down from the cross. They wrapped his body in linen cloths with burial spices. 75 pounds of spices, John tells us, the burial preparation of a king. They placed him in a tomb that belonged to a man named Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, which meant the tomb was carved from solid rock. Not a shallow cave, a proper, sealed burial chamber. They rolled a massive stone across the entrance, and they left. But the religious leaders didn't sleep easy that night, because they remembered something. Something Jesus had said, publicly, more than once, that he would rise again on the third day. They didn't believe it, but they were afraid that his followers might try to steal the body and then claim it had happened. So they went to Pilate. They asked for a guard to be posted at the tomb. Pilate gave them soldiers, Roman soldiers, not temple guards, professionals, men whose lives depended on not failing at their assignment. They sealed the stone, officially, with the seal of Rome. Breaking that seal was a capital offense, and then they posted the guard. So picture it now. Saturday, the day of Sabbath rest, the city of Jerusalem quiet. The disciples locked behind doors in an upper room, devastated, terrified, completely shattered. The women who had followed Jesus from Galilee sitting together in grief, too deep for words. The religious leaders feeling satisfied, vindicated, certain that this chapter was now permanently closed. The tomb sealed, guarded, silent, and somewhere inside it, a body, wrapped in linen, still, cold, dead. But here's the question that should already be forming in your mind. Was it still? Because we know what happened on Saturday. In a previous video, we went deep into those 3 days. The descent, the cosmic confrontation, the declaration in the realm of the dead. But what about Sunday morning? What about the moment the body in that tomb began to change? What about the precise, impossible, unwitnessable moment when death lost? That's where we're going now. It is Sunday morning. The sky over Jerusalem is the deep, impenetrable black that exists only in the last hour before dawn. The darkest moment, the moment just before the world begins to remember that light exists. The city is asleep. The streets are empty. The garden outside the city walls where the tomb sits is silent, except for the breathing of the soldiers posted at the entrance. They've been there all night. They're tired. They're cold. Nothing has happened. Nothing is going to happen. This is the easiest guard duty in the Roman military, watching a dead man's grave. In a few more hours, they'll be relieved. They'll go eat something. They'll sleep. And then, Matthew's Gospel describes it with a precision that feels like someone struggling to find human language for something that has no human equivalent. There was a violent earthquake, not a tremor, not a rumble. Violent. The Greek word is seismos megas, a great shaking. The same kind of shaking that happened the moment Jesus died, as if the earth itself is responding, again, to something happening in a dimension it can feel but cannot fully contain. And an angel of the Lord descended from heaven, came down, out of heaven, into the garden, in the last darkness before dawn. Matthew says his appearance was like lightning, not like a candle, not like a torch, like lightning. Instantaneous, overwhelming, obliterating, the kind of brightness that doesn't illuminate the darkness so much as annihilate it. His clothing was white as snow, pure white, the white of something that has never been touched by anything dark. He came to the tomb, he rolled back the stone, and then he sat on it. That detail, the angel sitting on the rolled-away stone, is one of the most quietly powerful images in the entire Gospel account. He didn't roll it back frantically. He didn't roll it back and immediately disappear. He rolled it back and sat on it, calmly, as if to say, "This is done. This chapter is closed. This stone is not going back." And the soldiers who were there, the trained Roman soldiers who had seen battle, who had executed prisoners, who were afraid of nothing that walked the earth. They looked at what was happening, and they shook with fear, and they fell to the ground like dead men, like dead men. Soldiers who had helped kill Jesus 3 days before. now lying on the ground of his garden, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except lie there, while something happened that was completely outside every category they had for how the world works. What did they see? Matthew tells us about the earthquake and the angel and the stone, but the resurrection itself, the actual moment when Jesus' body came back to life, happened before any of this. The stone wasn't rolled away to let Jesus out. He was already gone. The stone was rolled away to let people in. So what happened inside that tomb in the darkness of Saturday night, or the pre-dawn hours of Sunday morning, in those moments before the earthquake, before the angel, before anyone arrived? Nobody saw it. No human being witnessed the actual moment of resurrection. And I think that's intentional. I think there are things too sacred, too enormous, too far beyond human capacity to process, that they happen in the presence of God alone. The moment when death was defeated was not a public spectacle. It was a private transaction between the Father and the Son, in the darkness, in the silence, in a sealed tomb while the world slept. And then the sealed tomb was no longer sealed, and the world woke up to find out. This was not just a miracle. This was a moment that changed reality itself. Let me explain what I mean by that, because that's not just dramatic language. That's a precise claim. Every miracle recorded in the Bible, the parting of the Red Sea, the healing of the blind, the raising of Lazarus, every single one of those events was a suspension of natural law, a temporary override. The laws of physics and biology paused, the miracle occurred, and then the world went back to operating normally. Lazarus was raised from the dead, and Lazarus eventually died again. The resurrection of Jesus is not that. The resurrection of Jesus is not a suspension of natural law followed by a return to normal. It is the permanent establishment of a new order. Jesus did not come back to life only to eventually die again. He came back in a body that was the same, recognizable, physical, bearing the wounds of the crucifixion, and yet completely different. A body that was no longer subject to death. A body that had passed through death and come out the other side into something that death has no power over. Paul calls Jesus the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. First fruits, the first harvest, the sample, the guarantee of what is coming. Not a one-off miracle, the beginning of a new category of existence. What happened in that tomb was not a resuscitation. It was a transformation, the first human body to pass through death and emerge into what the New Testament calls resurrection life, something that is physical and real and touchable, but that operates by entirely different rules than the world we currently inhabit. Death met its match, and lost, not temporarily, not conditionally, permanently and finally and completely. The rules changed on a Sunday morning in Jerusalem in 33 AD, and nobody knew it yet. The first people to find out were women. Of course they were. While the disciples, the men, were still locked behind doors in fear, the women were moving. Before dawn, carrying spices to complete the burial preparation that the urgency of Friday afternoon hadn't allowed time to finish. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, Salome, Joanna. Moving through the dark streets of Jerusalem before sunrise, toward a tomb they had watched be sealed 2 days ago. And as they walked, they talked about the practical problem facing them. Who will roll the stone away for us? That was the conversation. Not, do you think he might be alive? Not, what if something miraculous happened? Just, the stone is too heavy. We can't move it ourselves. How are we going to get inside to finish preparing the body? They didn't know yet. Nobody had told them. No angelic announcement had reached the upper room. No supernatural warning had prepared them. They were walking toward a sealed tomb at dawn with burial spices, planning to complete a burial that was about to turn out to be permanently unnecessary. What happened next depends on which gospel you're reading, and I want to walk through each of them carefully, because together they paint a picture that is richer and more complex and more human than any single account alone. Mark's gospel, the earliest, the most immediate, the one that reads like someone who was in the room when these stories were first told, says that when the women arrived and looked up, they saw that the stone had already been rolled away. It was very large, Mark tells us, as if to emphasize that this was not something that could have happened accidentally. Somebody moved it. Something moved it. And it was already done by the time they got there. They went inside the tomb, and they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side. Mark says they were alarmed. Alarmed. That's almost an understatement. They came to anoint a dead body and found a glowing figure sitting calmly in the place where the body had been. Everything they had prepared themselves for, the grief, the ritual, the finality of it, gone. Replaced by something they had no category for. The figure spoke. Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. See the place where they laid him. Come and look at the empty space. Come and confirm it with your own eyes. The place where a body was, there is no body. The linen cloths that had wrapped him, still there, folded, left behind. But him? Gone. Go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And Peter. Why does the angel specifically name Peter? Why single him out from the other disciples? Because Peter had denied Jesus 3 times on the night of his arrest. 3 times he had looked people in the eye and said, I don't know him. I'm not one of his followers. I have nothing to do with that man. And then the rooster crowed, and Jesus turned and looked at him from across the courtyard, and Peter went outside and wept bitterly. The last interaction Peter had with Jesus. Jesus looking at him across a courtyard after the 3rd denial. And now the first message from the risen Jesus specifically includes Peter's name. Go tell the disciples, and Peter. Make sure Peter knows. Make sure he understands that the resurrection doesn't erase his failure. Make sure he knows he's still included. That's not a small detail. That's everything. Now let's follow Mary Magdalene specifically, because her story deserves its own space. Because what happens to her is one of the most emotionally devastating and then devastatingly beautiful sequences in all of Scripture. John's Gospel tells us that Mary came to the tomb while it was still dark. She came early, alone or ahead of the other women. The accounts can be read different ways, but John focuses on her. She came in the darkness. She got there and saw that the stone had been removed, and she ran. She didn't go inside. She turned around and ran back to Simon Peter and the disciple Jesus loved, John himself. And she said, They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him. Her immediate assumption is not resurrection. Her immediate assumption is theft. Grave robbing. Someone has taken the body. Someone has violated even this, the one thing that remained, the one thing death had left them with, the physical fact of his body in a tomb. Someone has taken even that. Peter and John ran. John outran Peter and arrived first. He bent down and looked in and saw the linen cloths lying there, but didn't go in. Then Peter arrived, characteristically went straight in. He saw the linen cloths, and the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded separately, placed by itself. That detail, that one specific detail that John includes, the face cloth folded and placed separately, has generated centuries of discussion. Because it doesn't match grave robbery. Grave robbers don't fold linens. Grave robbers don't carefully arrange burial cloths. Grave robbers take the body and leave a mess. This was not a robbery. Something deliberate happened here. Something intentional. Someone, or something, left those linens behind with the kind of care that implies complete calm. Complete control, not the urgency of escape, the serenity of completion. John says he went in, and he saw, and he believed. Just like that. No angel, no dramatic announcement, just the empty space and the folded cloth, and something clicked inside him that he couldn't explain. He believed. But then they went home. Both of them. Peter and John went back to where they were staying, and they left Mary there, standing in the garden, alone, weeping. If the resurrection story has a human heart, this is it. This moment. Mary Magdalene standing outside the empty tomb, weeping, because the body of the man who had changed her life was gone, and she didn't know where he was, and she didn't understand what was happening, and nobody had stayed with her, and she was alone in a garden in the early morning, and everything was wrong. She bent down and looked into the tomb, and she saw two angels, one at the head and one at the foot of where Jesus' body had been lying. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" And her answer, in the middle of an encounter with two supernatural beings, which she seems barely to register, her answer is so completely human, it breaks you. "They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." She's not afraid of the angels. She's not amazed. She's too deep in grief for amazement. She just wants to know where he is. She turned around, and she saw someone standing there. She didn't recognize him. She assumed, the most natural assumption in a garden in the morning, that he was the gardener. He asked her the same question the angels had asked. "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" And she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." I will get him. She's a woman, on her own, in the 1st century, offering to go and physically retrieve the body of a grown man if someone will just tell her where it is. The desperation of love making impossible promises. "Tell me where he is, and I will go get him. I don't care how. I don't care what it costs. Just tell me where he is, and then..." One word. Mary. He said her name, just her name, just that one word, in his voice, his actual voice, the voice she had heard for years, the voice she knew like she knew her own, the voice that had spoken healing over her life. And everything collapsed, and everything opened up in one impossible, earth-shattering, world-reversing moment. She turned toward him. Rabboni. Teacher. Not a title. A name. Her name for him. The words soaked in years of following and learning and love and loss and grief. And now, in a garden, in the morning light that was just beginning to break. Restoration so complete, it had no words except the most personal one she had. This is the moment. This is the resurrection. Made human, made intimate, made personal. Not a theological event first. A reunion, a specific woman and a specific man and one word that contained an entire world. Mary. That's how Jesus announces the resurrection. Not to the high priest, not to Pilate, not to the religious establishment or the political power or the philosophical schools, not with thunder and spectacle and undeniable cosmic display. to a woman standing alone, weeping, in a garden, with her name. Now let's pull back from the intimacy of that moment and look at the larger picture. Because what unfolds over the next 40 days is the most documented series of post-death appearances in ancient history. This is not one woman having a private mystical experience. This is not a vision or a dream or a grief-induced hallucination. What happens after the resurrection is repeated. Physical, verifiable, multi-witness appearances of Jesus to hundreds of people in multiple locations over an extended period of time. Paul, writing to the church in Corinth within 25 years of the resurrection, well within the lifetime of eyewitnesses, at a time when those witnesses could still be questioned, lists them. Jesus appeared to Peter, then to the 12 disciples, then to more than 500 people at once, and Paul specifically notes that most of them are still alive, as if to say, "Go ask them, go find them, they're still there, they can tell you themselves." Then to James, then to all the apostles, then to Paul himself, 500 people at once. Think about what it would take to explain that away. 500 people, in the same place, at the same time, all having the same collective hallucination. Grief-induced mass delusion. That is a more miraculous explanation than resurrection. Mass hallucination of a specific, detailed physical person who talks and eats and shows his wounds doesn't happen. It has never been documented to happen. The disciples didn't believe it at first either. When the women came back from the tomb with their report, Luke tells us that the apostles didn't believe them. It seemed to them like nonsense, idle tales. The Greek word Luke uses, leros, means delirious ravings. They thought the women were out of their minds with grief. Thomas, famously, refused to believe until he could touch the wounds himself, and Jesus didn't rebuke him for that. He came and he stood before Thomas, and he said, "Here, put your finger in the nail holes. Put your hand in my side. Don't be faithless. See for yourself. This is not a story being constructed by people who desperately wanted to believe and therefore saw what they hoped to see. This is a story of people who were deeply skeptical, who required physical evidence, who didn't believe until they couldn't not believe anymore, and then they couldn't stop talking about it. Even when talking about it got them arrested. Even when talking about it got them beaten. Even when talking about it put them in front of the same authorities who had killed Jesus, who had every political and social incentive to produce the body and end the whole thing, and couldn't, because there was no body. There was no body. The religious leaders knew this was a problem. Matthew tells us that the soldiers who had been guarding the tomb, who had seen whatever they saw in that garden before dawn, who had fallen like dead men, went to the chief priests and reported everything that had happened. And the chief priests called a meeting with the elders. They gave the soldiers a large sum of money, and they told them what to say. His disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. While we were asleep. Think about what they're asking these soldiers to say. Roman soldiers on guard duty, admitting they fell asleep on the job. That was a capital offense in the Roman military. Sleeping on guard duty could get you executed. The priests knew that, so they added, "If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble. In other words, we'll bribe Pilate too. Don't worry. Just say you were asleep." And Matthew says the soldiers took the money and did as they were told. But think about the logic of that cover story. If the soldiers were asleep, how did they know it was the disciples who took the body? How do you know who did something while you're unconscious? The story contradicts itself in its first sentence. And why would the disciples steal the body? To claim a resurrection they didn't believe was going to happen. To start a movement that would lead every single one of them to imprisonment, persecution, and death, for a lie they had manufactured, for a story they knew to be false. People die for things they believe to be true. People occasionally die for things they mistakenly believe to be true. Nobody dies for something they know to be a lie, when admitting the lie would save their life. And the disciples died for this. One by one. James beheaded, Peter crucified upside down, Andrew crucified, Thomas speared, Philip crucified, Bartholomew skinned alive, Matthew killed by sword, James the son of Alphaeus stoned, Thaddeus killed by arrows, Simon the Zealot crucified. Every single one of them, every man who had seen the risen Jesus, who had eaten with him, who had touched him, who had spent 40 days with him after the resurrection, died rather than deny it. Men die for things they believe. The disciples died for something they claimed to have seen with their own eyes, touched with their own hands, heard with their own ears. That is a different category of testimony. But let me go back to the prophecy. Because the resurrection didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened as the culmination of a story that had been building for thousands of years. A story that had been written, spoken, sung, and prophesied across centuries by people who had no way of knowing the specific details they were describing. Isaiah, writing 700 years before the crucifixion, described a suffering servant who would be pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities, who would be led like a lamb to the slaughter, who would be assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, which is precisely what happened. Jesus crucified between two criminals, and then buried in the tomb of a wealthy man. And then, Isaiah says, after he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life, written 700 years before it happened. Psalm 16, written by David 1,000 years before the crucifixion. You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay. Psalm 22, a psalm that begins with the exact words Jesus cried from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? A psalm written 1,000 years before crucifixion was even invented as a method of execution, describes in precise detail the physical experience of crucifixion. They have pierced my hands and my feet. They divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. The soldiers at the foot of the cross did exactly that. And then Psalm 22 ends not in death, but in proclamation, not in defeat, but in declaration. Future generations will be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness, declaring to a people yet unborn, he has done it. He has done it. The resurrection was not a surprise ending to a story that had gone wrong. It was the climax of a story that had been written before time began and announced in fragments across 1,000 years of human history, waiting for the moment when all the pieces would come together in a garden outside Jerusalem on a Sunday morning. Now I need to talk about what happened on the road to Emmaus, because this is the story that, for me, captures something about the resurrection that the empty tomb alone doesn't quite reach. It's the same day, Sunday, later in the afternoon. Two of Jesus' followers, not the 12, not the inner circle, just two ordinary followers, are walking from Jerusalem to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles away. And they're talking about everything that had happened, processing it, going over it, the crucifixion, the burial, the reports from the women that morning about the empty tomb and the angels, and a stranger falls into step beside them. He asks what they're talking about. They stopped walking. Luke says they stood still, their faces downcast. And one of them said, almost incredulously, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who doesn't know the things that have happened there in these days?" They tell him. They explain. Jesus of Nazareth, a prophet, powerful in word and deed, how the chief priests handed him over, how he was crucified, and then, we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. We had hoped, past tense. We had hoped, but now we're walking away from Jerusalem because hope is over. And the stranger begins to speak. Beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. All of it. The entire tapestry of prophecy and promise, woven together, shown to these two ordinary followers, walking in grief down a dusty road. They reached the village. The stranger acted as if he was going further. They urged him to stay. "Come and eat with us. It's late." And he went in. He sat at the table. He took bread. He gave thanks. He broke it. And he gave it to them. And their eyes were opened. Just like that. In the breaking of bread, the same gesture, the same hands, the same moment they had seen before, and now they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. And they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road, while he opened the scriptures to us? Were not our hearts burning?" They felt it before they understood it. Something had been happening in their chests while he talked to them, something they couldn't name until the moment of recognition. And then it all made sense. The burning, the clarity, the way the scriptures had seemed to open up and breathe, the way everything had suddenly fit together. They got up immediately. Not tomorrow, not after they'd eaten and rested, immediately. And they walked the 7 miles back to Jerusalem in the dark to tell the others. That's what an encounter with the risen Jesus does. It makes you get up and walk 7 miles in the dark to tell someone else. And then there's the breakfast on the beach. John 21, after everything, after the resurrection appearances in Jerusalem, after Thomas seeing and believing, after the doors that had been locked are now open, Peter decides he's going fishing, back to what he knew, back to the sea, back to the life before all of this. And some of the others went with him. They fished all night and caught nothing. In the morning, as dawn was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore. They didn't recognize him from the distance. He called out, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" They said no. He told them to throw the net on the right side of the boat. They did. And the net was so full of fish, they couldn't haul it in. John looked at the net, looked at the shore, and said to Peter, "It is the Lord." And Peter, impulsive, emotional, all or nothing Peter, he grabbed his outer garment, he'd been working and was barely dressed, put it on, and threw himself into the water and swam to shore. Because he couldn't wait, because 100 yards was too far when Jesus was on the beach. When they got to shore, they found a fire of burning coals, fish on it, bread. Jesus said, "Come have breakfast, come have breakfast." The risen Lord of all creation, the one who had passed through death and defeated it, the one who held the keys of death and Hades, the one whose resurrection had cracked history in half, was cooking fish on a beach and inviting his friends to eat breakfast. The intimacy of that moment is almost too much to hold. It doesn't fit the categories we create for God. It doesn't match the remote, untouchable, cosmic deity that religion tends to construct. This is a man who made a fire, cooked food, and said, "Sit down and eat because you've been fishing all night and you're hungry." This is what the resurrection produced. Not just a theological event, not just a world historical moment, a breakfast on a beach with people he loved. And then Jesus and Peter talked. 3 times Jesus asked Peter, "Do you love me?" 3 times. The same number of times Peter had denied him, and 3 times Peter said yes, and 3 times Jesus gave him a purpose. Feed my lambs, take care of my sheep, feed my sheep. The restoration was as specific as the failure. 3 denials, 3 questions, 3 restorations. Jesus doesn't do generic forgiveness. He does targeted, precise, personal restoration. He finds the exact wound and he addresses it directly. He doesn't pretend the failure didn't happen. He doesn't say, "Don't worry about it, forget it, move on." He goes to exactly the place of the breaking and he rebuilds it, stone by stone, question by question. "Do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." "Then feed my sheep." That's not punishment. That's not penance. That's purpose. The man who failed most publicly was given the most significant role, not despite his failure, I would argue in part because of it. Because the man who had been broken and restored would understand broken people in a way that someone who had never failed never could. The resurrection didn't just change what was possible for humanity in the cosmic sense. It changed what was possible for Peter. Specifically, personally. The man who wept in a courtyard at dawn was standing on a beach at dawn, restored, recommissioned, given everything back. 40 days. For 40 days, Jesus appeared to his followers, teaching, explaining, opening the scriptures, eating with them, preparing them. 40 days of the most extraordinary postgraduate course in history, taught by someone who had died and come back on the other side of everything. And then, on a hillside outside Jerusalem, he gathered them together one more time, and he ascended. He rose into the sky, and the cloud received him, and he was gone. And the disciples stood there, staring up into the sky, until 2 figures in white appeared beside them and said, "Why are you standing there looking into the sky? This same Jesus, who has been taken from you into heaven, will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven." He's coming back. The resurrection was not the end of the story. It was the middle. Now I want to stop, and I want to look you in the eye through this screen, and I want to ask you something real, not theological, not abstract, personal. What does the resurrection mean for you? Not for Christianity as a world religion, not for church history, not for apologetics and debates and arguments about historicity. For you, sitting where you are right now, in whatever season of life you're in, whatever you're carrying, whatever you're afraid of. If death was defeated, what are you still afraid of? I mean that with full seriousness, not as a dismissal of fear, not as a spiritual platitude, as a genuine question that I think has the power to reorganize your life if you let it land properly. The resurrection says something specific about fear, about the fear that runs most of our decisions most of the time. Because most of what we fear, underneath all the specific objects of fear, underneath the fear of failure and rejection and loss and change and the unknown, most of what we fear is some variation of death. The death of a relationship, the death of a dream, the death of who you thought you were, the death of what you thought your life was going to be, the death of your health, the death of the people you love. Death, or the threat of it, is the engine behind most human anxiety.